Today, I'm going to review Dark Nova EA MT5. To start with my conclusion, Dark Nova looks very strong if you only look at its current forward performance. However, this EA uses a grid and martingale approach. Because of that, I believe it should basically be viewed as a high-risk EA. First, the public forward results for Dark Nova 3 pairs MT4 can be checked on Myfxbook. As of April 2026, the account shows a gain of around 797%, and the monthly growth is also over 13%. Looking only at these numbers, it looks very attractive. However, the most important thing to be careful about is the grid and martingale structure. This type of EA can look almost unbeatable while the market keeps returning. Even when it has floating losses, it adds more positions and closes them together once the market comes back. That is why short-term forward results can look good. In a sense, this is expected. The real problem is what happens when the market does not come back. Looking at the trading history, we can see multiple positions being opened on the same currency pair and closed around the same time. We can also see lot sizes increasing from 0.01 to 0.03, 0.04, and 0.05. This is exactly the kind of behavior we need to be careful about with grid and martingale EAs. Most of the time, the EA may keep winning small amounts, but once it gets caught in a strong trend, the floating loss can increase very quickly. And in the worst case, one major market move can wipe out the profits accumulated up to that point. Next, I ran my own backtest. The conditions were AUDCAD from January 2005 to April 2026, with an initial balance of $1,000, a fixed 0.01 lot size, and all other settings left at default. As a result, the backtest ended in profit. However, the most important point here is not the final profit. The key question is how much floating loss the account had to endure along the way. Even with a fixed 0.01 lot size, the maximum equity drawdown reached $2,377. In other words, even with 0.01 lot trading, the account had to withstand an equity drop of more than $2,000. This is a very difficult level for a small account. With grid and martingale EAs, it is dangerous to look only at drawdown percentages. The impression can change a lot depending on the initial balance and lot size. What really matters is how many dollars of floating loss occurred per 0.01 lot. In this test, the absolute drawdown amount was very large. Dark Nova does have a fixed monetary stop loss enabled by default, so it is not an EA that holds unlimited positions forever with no stop loss at all. That is a positive point. However, this does not mean the EA is safe just because a stop loss setting exists. In the actual backtest, even with a fixed 0.01 lot size, a large equity drawdown still occurred. So even with the stop loss setting, the typical risks of grid and martingale trading remain significant. This is the forward trading history displayed on the chart. White indicates buy trades, and red indicates sell trades. We can see that when the market moves against the position, additional positions are opened in the same direction. This is not the behavior of an EA that simply takes one trade and cuts the loss. It is a type of EA that waits for the market to return. On the H1 chart, the position stacking structure becomes even easier to see. This logic can look very strong in a range-bound market. However, if a strong trend occurs and the market does not return, multiple positions can carry floating losses at the same time. As a result, the account can take serious damage in a short period of time. To summarize, Dark Nova's current forward performance looks very strong. The fact that public results can be checked on Myfxbook is also a positive point. However, the most important point is that this EA uses a grid and martingale structure, which makes it a high-risk EA. This type of EA can look very stable during good periods, but that does not mean the risk is low. In fact, it may simply be postponing floating losses and relying on the market to return. Judging it as safe just because the short-term forward performance looks good is very dangerous. If you are considering purchasing this EA, do not judge it only by the profit rate shown in the public forward test. You should carefully check the maximum equity drawdown, lot size increases, the number of simultaneous positions, and the stop-loss conditions. My evaluation is that Dark Nova does have profit potential. However, it is basically a high-risk EA, especially for people who are not used to grid and martingale EAs. Buying it only because the performance looks good could be very dangerous. Before being attracted by the high growth rate, you should always consider how much the loss could expand if the market does not return. Dark Nova is an EA that should be judged very carefully.